Should you go to graduate or professional school, or just stick with your bachelor's degree? This is a hot flashpoint of argument, and there's a paper by Georgetown University called The College Payoff that was written in 2011 that strongly says that the answer is yes. You should always go and get as much education as you possibly can. First off, I think that this is maybe somewhat of a biased study because think about who's writing it. Folks that are professors at a very highly expensive university. So I think that that's a little amusing, but let's say that it's a totally unbiased paper and just look at it in an objective sense exclusively. So some of the issues that I have with the methodologies that the authors use to justify their conclusion that it always makes sense to go to get more education. The first is they looked at lifetime earnings without thinking about discounting them to the present value. Why that's a problem is because if you have a stream of cash flows that's front-loaded versus a stream of cash flows that's mostly happening later on, then the absolute dollars looking at each of those two scenarios gives you a misleading difference. If the higher earning professional degree person is making a lot more money than the person that only has the bachelor's degree, because the value of money today is a heck of a lot more than the value of money way off into the future, and that's the concept of present value. So you have to discount both of those streams of cash flows to today's dollars. If you did that, the difference in the earnings that somebody gets as a professional versus a bachelor's degree holder would be vastly different than what the authors are claiming. The second big problem with the paper is that the authors don't really think about the fact that earnings differences are taxed. The more and more money you make, the less and less you get to keep because of our progressive tax code. So that means somebody that's making $50,000 or $60,000 would keep almost everything they're making, whereas somebody that makes maybe $100,000 or $120,000 might lose a significantly higher percentage of it to taxes. And the authors don't think about that. The third problem I have with the paper is the authors assume that they are only bonds in the world to invest in, that that's the only option that people can put their money into. So what they do is they basically say, well, the money that somebody could make by not going to school and investing the money instead, we're going to say that they only earn inflation on it, basically. Because if we let them earn a reasonable rate of return in the stock market, then that would hurt our conclusion and make the difference between the earnings premiums for graduate school education look not as impressive. So that's why they chose this artificially low interest rate, in my opinion, is because they were trying to really overstate the case that, where it makes sense to go to graduate school. The fourth reason is they assume that workers never take time off. That's not realistic. People take time off all the time for things like raising a family, taking care of a sick parent, or just because they need to. And if you take time off for a shorter working career because you're going to start later on because you went to graduate school, then the impact of that on your earnings is way more significant than if you took some time off at a lower earning income level and you had a longer working career because you started at an earlier age. Finally, the authors make no mention of the cost of education. This is something that happens all the time, and places like US News, they'll make a list of the top 100 jobs in America, but they'll make zero mention of how much it costs to become one of those top 100 jobs in America. That is ridiculous. You have to look at the cost of something to be able to judge the return on investment, but nobody does this, and it's the biggest load of crap I've ever seen in my life. So you really have to think, if I'm going to make more money, does it make sense to give up that opportunity cost of 4 or 5 years of me working and making a decent amount of money and saving it? And does it make sense to pay all of these massively higher expenses for the education that you're trying to get? In most cases, I think it probably will not. And so here's the reality. You need to look and see with graduate school what the cost is. If the cost is super high and it's going to put you more than 2 times your expected income when you graduate, then that's not worth it economically. No matter what anybody tells you, it's just not worth it probably compared to going and working in some sort of other field where you can make money right away. So if you have other motivations besides financial ones for going to graduate education and getting a professional degree, that's fine. But do not think that it's a good financial decision. Regardless of what your financial aid office tells you, keep in mind that those folks are essentially the sales department of the university trying to convince you to go to the school, and if they tried to tell people otherwise that, hey, maybe it's not a good idea to take out $550,000 of debt to go get a dental degree, if they suggested that that was not a smart decision, then they would get fired. So use your own brain as to whether or not you should go to graduate school or not, and don't just jump right in because you think that somebody tells you some truism that maybe was true 20 or 30 years ago, but that was when tuition was 10% as much as it is today. Make your own decision in deciding the important pathway in life of whether or not you should go to a bachelor's degree or a professional school program.